Part 1. The Galactic Academy. Minho sat in the back row of the lecture hall, his fingers tapping nervously against his tablet. Around him, students from a dozen different worlds whispered to each other in various languages. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few didn't even have recognizable faces. The Interspecies Academy was home to the brightest minds in the Galactic Coalition, and Minho was one of only 5 humans attending this year. The lights dimmed as Professor Velkus entered the room. The Centaurian was tall and thin, with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like polished silver. He moved to the center of the stage with the confidence of someone who had taught for 300 years. Today we discuss the failures of primitive conservation, Professor Velkus announced, his voice echoing through the hall. Before species join the coalition, they often lose much of their biodiversity through ignorance and poor planning. Minho felt his stomach tighten. He knew what was coming. The professor waved one of his hands and a hologram appeared above the stage. It showed a large gray creature with sharp teeth and glowing yellow eyes. The creature snarled at the audience and several students gasped. "The wolf," Professor Velkus said with a hint of disdain. "Once common on Earth, now extinct for over 150 years. Humanity allowed these dangerous predators to die out through habitat destruction and conflict. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late." The hologram showed wolves attacking livestock, fighting with each other, and prowling through darkness. Everything about the presentation made them look like monsters. The wolf vanished in 2089, the professor continued, decades before humanity joined us. They had the technology to save these creatures but chose not to use it properly. This is why the Coalition's methods are superior. We preserve species before they reach the point of no return. Minho's classmate, an insectoid Velcrin named Ara, raised one of her many limbs. "Professor, what made wolves so difficult to preserve?" "They were violent, unpredictable, and required vast territories," Professor Velkus replied. "Humans feared them, and rightfully so. Wolves killed their livestock and occasionally attacked humans. The species was incompatible with human civilization." Minho bit his tongue. Everything the professor said was wrong, but he couldn't speak up. Not yet. He had learned during his first semester that challenging coalition teachings was a quick way to fail classes and lose respect. Beside him, Ara's compound eyes fixed on Minho's face. She had noticed his reaction. Ara was incredibly observant, a trait common among her species. She tilted her head slightly. A gesture Minho had learned meant she was curious. The lecture continued for another hour. Professor Velkus showed examples of other extinct Earth species, tigers, pandas, elephants, though Minho knew that some of these still existed in hidden places. The Coalition's records were incomplete, based on old military surveys from before first contact. But nobody seemed interested in updating them. When class finally ended, students filed out in small groups. Minho gathered his things slowly, hoping to avoid conversation, but Ara waited by the door. "You were upset during the lecture," she said as they walked together down the curved hallway. The Academy's walls were transparent here, showing the planet Axis Prime rotating slowly below them. "I'm fine," Minho replied. "You are not fine. I observed 17 stress indicators in your body language." Ara's translator device made her clicking sounds into smooth words. "The lecture about wolves disturbed you specifically." Minho stopped walking and looked at his friend. They had been lab partners for 6 months now, and Ara had proven trustworthy. But this was dangerous territory. "What if I told you the Coalition doesn't know everything about Earth?" Minho asked quietly. Ara's antennae twitched. "That would be concerning. The Coalition prides itself on accurate records." "Yeah, well, pride doesn't make something true." Before Ara could respond, another human appeared around the corner. Taeyang, Minho's roommate, was carrying an armload of books and grinning widely. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere. Did you hear? The Academy is hosting the Interspecies Science Symposium next semester. Students can present research projects." Taeyang's enthusiasm was infectious. He was everything Minho wasn't, outgoing, confident, and proud to represent humanity. "That's great," Minho said, though his mind was already racing with possibilities. "You should present something," Taeyang suggested. "Show these aliens what humans can do." Ara watched the exchange with interest. "What would you present, Minho?" "I'm not sure yet," Minho lied. "I need to think about it." That evening, Minho sat alone in his quarters. The room was small but comfortable. with a window overlooking the Academy's central gardens. Students from various worlds walked below, some humanoid, others so alien that Minho still couldn't figure out which. And was the front. He opened his personal terminal and activated the encryption software his father had given him before he left Earth. The message he composed was short and simple. I need your help. Can you send Hanal to Axis Prime? I'm going to show them the truth. The response came 3 hours later in the middle of the night. Minho was still awake, staring at the ceiling and questioning his decision. Are you sure about this? It's dangerous. But if anyone can do it, you can. Hanal will arrive at the start of next semester. Be careful, son. Minho smiled despite his nervousness. His father ran one of the hidden wolf preserves in what used to be called Montana. The preserve was home to over 200 wolves, living and thriving in a protected wilderness that the Coalition knew nothing about. When humanity joined the Galactic Coalition 30 years ago, conservationists had made a difficult choice. They hid their most successful projects, fearing that advanced aliens would either eliminate dangerous species or take them away for museum collections. The official records showed many animals as extinct, and the conservationists let the galaxy believe it. But Minho had grown up among wolves. He had learned to respect them, understand them, and see them as something more than the monsters in Professor Velkas's hologram. Wolves had taught humanity about family, loyalty, and the balance of nature. They deserved better than to be remembered as failures. A knock on his door startled him. Minho closed his terminal quickly. Come in. Taeyang entered, looking worried. Couldn't sleep either. You've been acting strange since that conservation lecture. I'm planning something, Minho admitted. Something big. How big? Big enough to change what the galaxy thinks about Earth. Taeyang sat down on the opposite bed. That sounds either brilliant or incredibly stupid. Knowing you, probably both. Probably, Minho agreed. Whatever it is, I'm in, Taeyang said. We humans need to stick together out here. Minho nodded gratefully. He would need all the help he could get. In 3 months, Hanul would arrive and everything would change. The galaxy thought it knew Earth's story, but they had only read the first chapter. The real story was about to begin. Part 2. The Arrival. 3 months passed slowly for Minho. He attended his classes, completed his assignments, and tried not to think about what was coming. But every night he checked the cargo schedules, watching for the transport ship from Earth. Taeyang noticed his roommate's obsession, but didn't ask questions. He trusted that Minho would explain when the time was right. Ara, however, was less patient. You have been monitoring shipping routes for weeks, she observed one afternoon in the laboratory. They were supposed to be analyzing soil samples from a methane-based planet, but Ara's attention was fixed on Minho. You are expecting something. Maybe, Minho said, not looking up from his microscope. And this something relates to our conversation about Earth's incomplete records. Minho finally met her eyes. Yes, and when it arrives, I'll show you. I promise. The cargo ship appeared on schedule, 3 days before the new semester began. It was a massive vessel, carrying supplies and personal items for students from 100 different worlds. Minho stood in the receiving bay with dozens of other students, his hands sweating despite the cool air. The cargo master, a bored-looking Dralaxian with gray skin and too many eyes, called out names and identification numbers. Students stepped forward to claim packages, furniture, and various items from home. When Minho's number was called, several heads turned. Special delivery for human student Minho, the cargo master announced. Environmental container, biological contents. Requires immediate signature and multiple safety confirmations. The container was large, about the size of a small vehicle, and covered with warning labels. Biohazard symbols blinked in 3 different galactic languages. A soft humming came from inside, the sound of climate control and life support systems. Minho signed the electronic pad while other students whispered and pointed. He could feel their stares but ignored them. The cargo master helped him load the container onto a transport platform, and Minho guided it toward his quarters. Ara was waiting in the hallway outside his room. She wasn't alone. Taeyang was there, along with 2 other human students Minho knew slightly, Jiwon, a medical student, and Hyun, who studied astrophysics. The entire academy is talking about the mysterious container, Ara said. Whatever is inside must be remarkable. Or dangerous, Hyun added nervously. Minho looked at the small group. If I show you, you can't tell anyone, not yet. This is bigger than just me. We won't say anything, Jawan promised. We're curious now. They followed Minho into his quarters. The room was cramped with 6 people inside, and the large container made it worse. Minho sealed the door and activated privacy mode, which blocked all sensors and communications. His hands shook as he entered the unlock code. The container hissed and cold air escaped as the lid rose slowly. Inside, lying on a bed of soft material, was a young gray wolf. The alien students jumped backward. Even the humans looked shocked. Hyun made a small sound of fear. The wolf raised its head and looked directly at Minho. Its eyes were intelligent and calm, not the glowing yellow from Professor Velkis's hologram. The wolf's fur was silver gray, thick and healthy. It stood up, stretched, and wagged its tail slightly. "Everyone, meet Hanul," Minho said softly. "He's 2 years old and very well trained." "That's impossible," Ara whispered. Her translator struggled to keep up with her rapid clicking. "Wolves are extinct, dead, gone for 150 years. "No," Minho said firmly. "That's what the Coalition believes because that's what old military records said. But it's not true." Hanul stepped out of the container carefully. He was beautiful, moving with grace and power, but he didn't act aggressive. Instead, he walked directly to Minho and sat down, looking up at his human companion. Minho knelt and ran his hand through Hanul's fur. "My father runs a wolf preserve in Montana. So do dozens of other families across Earth. When the Coalition arrived, conservationists decided to hide some species. They were afraid aliens would take them away or kill them as threats." "How many wolves exist?" Jiwan asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. "Over 3,000 across multiple preserves," Minho replied. "Healthy populations living in protected wilderness." "The Coalition has no idea," Taeyang laughed suddenly. "We've been lying to the entire galaxy." "Not lying," Minho corrected. "Just not sharing everything. There's a difference." Ara moved closer, her fear fading into fascination. "May I?" "Touch him." "Hold out your hand slowly," Minho instructed. "Let him smell you first." Ara extended one of her limbs. Hanel sniffed it carefully, then allowed her to touch his head. The Velkrin's antennae quivered with excitement. "He is not violent at all," she observed. "Professor Velkis said wolves were uncontrollable predators." "Professor Velkis is wrong about a lot of things," Minho said. "Wolves can be dangerous, yes, but they're also intelligent, social, and loyal. Humans lived alongside wolves for thousands of years. We domesticated dogs from wolves. They're part of our history." Hyun spoke up from near the door, still keeping his distance. "Why did you bring him here? This is incredibly illegal. Unregistered species, biological contamination risks, violation of Coalition preservation laws. You could be expelled and imprisoned." "I know the risks," Minho said quietly. "But I'm tired of the galaxy thinking humanity failed. Professor Velkis uses wolves as an example of our primitive incompetence. I want to show the truth." "How?" Jiwan asked. "The Interspecies Science Symposium. I'm going to present Hanul as my research project." The room fell silent. Even Taeyang, usually supportive of crazy plans, looked worried. "They will arrest you," Ara said finally. "The Coalition does not tolerate surprises, especially involving potentially dangerous species." "Maybe," Minho acknowledged. "But I have documentation. Records from the preserves, genetic studies, behavioral research spanning decades. Everything the Coalition claims is impossible we've already done." "What do you want us to do?" Taeyang asked. "Help me take care of Hanul until the symposium. Help me prepare the presentation. And if things go wrong," Minho paused, "help me prove that Earth deserves respect." Jiwan nodded first. "I'm in. This is too important." "I'll help with the research data," Hyun added, though he still eyed Hanul nervously. Taeyang clapped Minho on the shoulder. "Obviously I'm helping. Someone needs to document this for history." All eyes turned to Ara. The Velkrin was still touching Hanul, her compound eyes reflecting the light in complex patterns. "I will help," she said slowly, "but not just because I am your friend. I will help because the Coalition's methods are not perfect. We preserve species in stasis, frozen in time. We do not let them live. If humanity found a better way, we should learn from it." Relief flooded through Minho. "Thank you, all of you." Hanul lay down at Minho's feet, comfortable and calm. The wolf had traveled across the galaxy in a small container, but he trusted his human companion completely. That trust, Minho knew, was what the Coalition didn't understand. "We need to keep him hidden for now," Minho said. "The Academy has security patrols, and if they discover Hanul before the symposium, we won't get our chance." "How long until the symposium?" Ji-won asked. 6 weeks. 6 weeks to change the galaxy's mind about Earth, Taeyang said with a grin. "No pressure." That night, after the others had left, Minho sat with Hanul in the darkened room. Through the window he could see stars, billions of them, representing civilizations that thought they knew everything. "We're going to show them," Minho whispered to the wolf. "We're going to show them that humans understand things they've forgotten." Hanul rested his head on Minho's lap, and for the first time in months, Minho felt truly at peace. The hardest part was still ahead, but at least now he wasn't facing it alone. The wolf from Earth had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. Part 3. The Demonstration. The secret lasted 12 days. Minho had known it was impossible to hide a wolf forever in a space station full of curious aliens, but he had hoped for more time. The rumor started in the cafeteria when another student claimed to hear strange sounds coming from the human dormitory section. By evening, half the academy was talking about it. On the 13th day, security arrived at Minho's door. Commander Voss was a Dralaxian with dark gray skin and 6 eyes that seemed to look in all directions at once. He wore the black uniform of Academy security and carried himself with rigid authority. Behind him stood 4 armed guards. "Student Minho," Commander Voss said formally, "we have received reports of an unregistered biological organism in your quarters. I am authorized to conduct a search." Minho's heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady. "I have a registered research project for the upcoming symposium." All proper forms were filed 3 days ago. This was technically true. Ara had helped him find an obscure regulation that allowed students to bring research specimens aboard if they registered them within 2 weeks of arrival. Minho had submitted the paperwork immediately, though he had been deliberately vague about what species Hanul was. Commander Voss checked his datapad. His multiple eyes blinked in sequence. "Your forms are present. However, the species classification is incomplete. I still need to verify the organism poses no threat." "May I ask who reported this?" Minho asked. "That information is confidential," but Minho could guess. Professor Velkus had been watching him closely since the beginning of the semester. The professor probably had students spying on the humans. "The organism is secured and poses no danger," Minho said. "But I request that my academic advisor be present during any inspection." Commander Voss's face twitched with annoyance, but Academy rules were clear. Students had rights, even human students. "Very well. We will return in 1 hour with Dean Saris." After the security team left, Minho immediately contacted Ara, Taeyang, and the others. They arrived within minutes, all looking worried. "They know," Hyun said nervously. "What do we do?" "We stick to the plan," Minho replied. "Hanul is a registered research project. They can inspect him, but they can't remove him without violating academic freedom protocols." "Unless they decide he is too dangerous," Ara pointed out. Minho knelt beside Hanul, who had been sleeping peacefully through all the commotion. The wolf looked up at him with trusting eyes. "Then we show them he's not dangerous. Right now, before they make up their minds." When Commander Voss returned, he brought not just Dean Saris but also Professor Velkus. The Centaurian professor looked triumphant, clearly expecting to see Minho expelled. Dean Saris was different. The Valtorian was old even by galactic standards, with wrinkled skin that shimmered with faint patterns and eyes that suggested deep wisdom. She had been Academy Dean for 200 years and had a reputation for fairness. "Show us this research specimen," Dean Saris said gently. Minho opened the container where Hanul rested. The wolf stepped out calmly and the room erupted in reactions. Professor Velkus stumbled backward. "Impossible. That's a wolf. They're extinct." Commander Voss drew his weapon. "That creature is classified as dangerous." "Stand down, Commander," Dean Saris ordered. Her voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "The creature is not attacking." Indeed, Hanul sat peacefully at Minho's feet, looking at the strangers with curiosity but no aggression. His tail wagged slightly. "This is Hanul," Minho said clearly. "He is a gray wolf from Earth. Wolves are not extinct despite what Coalition records claim. They have been living in protected preserves on Earth for over a century. Professor Velkis sputtered. This is fraud. Deception. You are lying to the Coalition. No, Ara interrupted, stepping forward with her datapad. The Coalition's records are incomplete. I have been researching Earth's databases for the past 2 weeks. The extinction date for wolves comes from a single military survey conducted during Earth's environmental crisis. No follow-up surveys were ever done. The Coalition assumed accuracy without verification. Dean Saris took the datapad and examined it carefully. Her expression was unreadable. Even if this wolf exists, Professor Velkis argued, bringing a dangerous predator to the Academy is reckless and illegal. Watch, Minho said simply. He gave Hanul a series of commands. The wolf sat, lay down, rolled over, and stayed perfectly still even when Minho walked across the room. Then Minho did something more impressive. He placed a piece of food on the floor directly in front of Hanul and said, Wait. The wolf stared at the food, clearly wanting it, but didn't move. After 30 seconds, Minho said, Okay, and Hanul ate the food gently. This demonstrates discipline and intelligence, Ara explained. Wolves are pack animals with complex social structures. They can be trained and they form strong bonds with humans. Earth's history includes thousands of years of coexistence. Commander Voss lowered his weapon slightly but still looked skeptical. One trained animal does not prove the species is safe. You're right, Taeyang said, speaking up for the first time. He activated his own datapad, projecting images into the air. So here are recordings from 6 different wolf preserves on Earth. Hundreds of wolves living in balanced ecosystems. Here are researchers working safely among them. Here are ecological studies showing how wolf reintroduction restored damaged environments. The images showed beautiful wilderness areas with wolves moving through forests and mountains. In some recordings, human researchers observed the wolves from close range without any protective gear. The wolves acknowledged the humans but didn't attack. Where did you get these recordings? Professor Velkis demanded. From Earth, Minho replied. From the conservationists who saved these animals while the rest of humanity was falling apart. They continued their work even after the Coalition arrived because they were afraid of exactly this kind of reaction. Dean Saris watched the recordings with intense focus. These preserves have existed for over a century? Yes, Minho confirmed. And the Coalition has no records of them? The Coalition never looked, Ara said bluntly. They accepted old data as complete truth. Professor Velkis's face darkened. This is outrageous. The Coalition's preservation protocols exist for good reasons. Do they? Jiwon challenged. The Coalition preserves species in stasis chambers and museum exhibits. You freeze them in time. You don't let them live, evolve, or interact with their environments. Is that really preservation, or is it just collecting? The question hung in the air. Dean Saris closed her eyes briefly, thinking. The symposium is in 4 weeks, she said finally. Student Minho, you will present your research at that time. Until then, the wolf will remain in a secured laboratory with appropriate environmental controls. You may visit and continue your research, but the creature cannot remain in your personal quarters. That's unacceptable, Professor Velkis protested. This animal should be removed immediately. Professor, Dean Saris said with steel in her voice, academic freedom is the foundation of this institution. Student Minho has followed proper registration procedures. He will have his opportunity to present his findings. If you disagree with this decision, you may file a formal complaint with the Coalition Education Committee. Professor Velkis looked like he wanted to argue further, but recognized the futility. He stormed out, his forearms rigid with anger. Commander Voss holstered his weapon. I will need to assign guards to the laboratory. That is acceptable, Minho agreed. After the officials left, the human students and Ara remained. They looked at each other, processing what had just happened. That went better than expected, Hyun said nervously. It's not over, Minho replied. We have 4 weeks to prepare the best presentation of our lives. Professor Velkis will do everything possible to discredit us before then. Ara's antennae twitched thoughtfully. Then we need more than just Hanul and some recordings. We need to prove that Earth's conservation philosophy is valid. We need to show why letting species live is better than freezing them. Can we do that in 4 weeks? Jiwon asked. Minho looked at Hanul, who was calmly accepting treats from Taeyang. The wolf had traveled across the galaxy and faced armed security without showing fear or aggression. He was proof that everything the Coalition believed about wolves was wrong. We have to try, Minho said. Not just for wolves, but for every species the Coalition has cataloged and controlled. If we can change one mind, we can change more. That night, as guards escorted Hanil to his new laboratory home, Minho stood at his window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere among them were thousands of civilizations, all believing they had figured out the right way to preserve life. 4 weeks. 4 weeks to prove that sometimes the youngest civilization in the galaxy understood something the oldest ones had forgotten. Part 5, The Aftermath. 6 weeks after the symposium, Administrator Corvin stood in a forest on Earth and watched wolves. The preserve was in what humans called Montana, a vast wilderness area in the northern part of the North American continent. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still covered with snow despite the warm season. A river ran through the valley, and beside it a pack of wolves moved through the trees. Minho stood beside the administrator, along with his father Do-hyun, who managed this preserve. Ara was there too, having requested permission to visit Earth as part of her research. She was recording everything with multiple devices, her compound eyes taking in details that most species would miss. "How many in this pack?" Administrator Corvin asked. 14, Do-hyun replied. He was older than Minho, with gray hair and weather-worn skin from decades of outdoor work. 3 adults, 5 juveniles, and 6 pups born this spring. The administrator watched as the adult wolves led their young to the river to drink. The pups played at the water's edge, splashing and wrestling while the adults kept watch. It was a scene of normal life, something the Coalition's stasis chambers could never capture. "I have reviewed Earth's conservation records," Administrator Corvin said. "Your networks preserved 43 species that Coalition databases listed as extinct. Some have been in these hidden preserves for over 150 years. "That's correct," Do-hyun confirmed. "Why did you not tell us when we made contact?" Do-hyun looked at the wolves before answering. "Because we had seen what happens when powerful forces take interest in things they don't understand. Human governments wanted to eliminate predators or control them. Corporations wanted to profit from them. When aliens arrived with technology beyond our imagination, we were afraid you would do the same. So we stayed quiet and kept protecting what we had saved." Administrator Corvin nodded slowly. "I understand your fear, and I am not entirely certain it was unjustified. The Coalition's first response to unknown species is often containment and control." "Exactly what we feared," Do-hyun said. They walked along the river, keeping a respectful distance from the wolf pack. The adult wolves were aware of the humans and the alien, but showed no aggression. They simply watched, assessed, and decided the visitors were not threats. "The Coalition has convened a special committee," Administrator Corvin said. "They are reviewing Earth status and conservation policies. There will be inquiries, debates, and likely many arguments." "Will we be punished?" Minho asked quietly. "That depends on how one defines punishment," the administrator replied. "Some Coalition members are angry about the deception. They feel humanity violated trust by hiding information. Others are fascinated by your methods and want to learn more. The debate will continue for years." "What do you think?" Ara asked. She had been unusually quiet during the visit, focused on her observations. Administrator Corvin stopped walking and looked at her. "I think the Coalition has been doing things the same way for so long that we forgot there might be other ways. We preserve species in stasis because it is safe, controlled, and guarantees survival." But Student Minho was correct. Survival is not the same as living. He turned back to watch the wolves. One of the pups had caught a fish and the others were trying to steal it. The adults watched the play with what looked like amusement. "These wolves are alive in ways that specimens in stasis chambers never will be," the administrator continued. "They play. They learn, they form relationships, they adapt to their environment. They are not frozen moments of a species. They are the species itself, continuing to exist and evolve." "So you agree with our approach?" Do-hyun asked, surprised. "I agree that your approach has value," Administrator Corvin corrected. "I also believe the Coalition's approach has value. Perhaps the answer is not choosing one method over the other, but learning to use both appropriately." They continued walking, following the pack as it moved through the forest. Ara recorded everything, already formulating papers she would write about Earth's conservation philosophy. "There is something else," Administrator Corvin said. "The Coalition would like to establish joint conservation programs with Earth. We would like to learn your methods and share our technology. Perhaps together we can develop better approaches to preservation." Minho felt hope bloom in his chest. Really? Yes, but it will require Earth to be more transparent about its hidden preserves. No more secrets. Do-hyun considered this carefully. The people who run these preserves are very protective. They will not agree to anything that puts the animals at risk. I understand. That is why I am here, to see firsthand how you operate and report back to the Coalition. If I can assure them that Earth's methods are sound and effective, it will be easier to build trust. Over the next few days, Administrator Corvin visited multiple preserves. He saw tigers in Asian forests, eagles in mountain ranges, and bears in northern woodlands. He met with dozens of conservationists who had dedicated their lives to protecting species the galaxy thought were gone. At each location, the pattern was the same. The animals lived in natural environments, adapted to changing conditions, and thrived without constant technological intervention. The human caretakers maintained the preserves, protected against poachers and pollution, but otherwise let nature follow its course. On the final day of his visit, Administrator Corvin returned to the wolf preserve. This time he was allowed closer to the pack. Minho and his father had been working with these wolves for years, and the animals trusted them enough to allow strangers nearby. Han-Nul was there, reunited with his birth pack. He recognized Minho immediately and bounded over, tail wagging. The young wolf had become famous across the galaxy. His image shone in classrooms and news reports as the wolf who changed minds. Administrator Corvin watched as Minho sat on the ground and Han-Nul settled beside him, just like at the symposium. But this time other wolves approached too. They sniffed the administrator cautiously, and one even allowed him to touch its fur. "They are magnificent," the administrator said quietly, "and I was wrong about them. We were all wrong." "You based your conclusions on incomplete information," Ara said. She had been documenting this moment carefully. "Science requires us to update our understanding when new evidence appears." "True," Administrator Corvin agreed. "But it also requires humility to admit when we were wrong. The Coalition has not always been good at humility." That evening they sat around a fire outside the preserve headquarters. It was a human tradition that Administrator Corvin found oddly comforting. In the distance, wolves howled, their voices carrying across the valley. "That sound was almost lost forever," Do-hyun said. "Twice, actually. Once during the environmental collapse, and again when we thought about telling the Coalition about the wolves. Both times we chose to fight for them." "I'm glad you did," Administrator Corvin said. "The galaxy is richer for having wolves in it, even if most of the galaxy does not know it yet." "What happens now?" Minho asked. "Now we work together," the administrator replied. "I will recommend that the Coalition establish joint conservation programs with Earth. I will also recommend curriculum changes at the Academy and other institutions, incorporating Earth's conservation philosophy alongside our traditional methods. Will Professor Velkus agree to that?" Ara asked with a hint of amusement. Administrator Corvin smiled, a gesture he had learned from humans. "Professor Velkus has been reassigned to a research station where he can focus on his work without teaching responsibilities. Dean Saris felt a change would be beneficial." Minho tried not to look too pleased about that news. "There is one more thing," Administrator Corvin said, looking directly at Minho. "The Academy would like you to continue your studies. They are offering you a position as a research fellow, studying Earth's conservation methods and helping develop new curriculum." "But I'm only a student," Minho protested. "You are a student who changed the way the galaxy thinks about preservation," the administrator countered. "That is worth more than any academic credential." Minho looked at his father, who nodded encouragingly. Then he looked at Ara, who clicked excitedly. "I would be honored," Minho said finally. "I also wish to continue this research," Ara added. "Earth's methods are fascinating and worthy of extensive study. I request permission to remain here for an extended period." "Granted," Administrator Corvin said. Tae-Yang, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "What about the rest of us? The other students who helped?" "Scholarships," the administrator replied, "for all students who contributed to this research. The Coalition values those who challenge conventional thinking, even when it makes us uncomfortable." The fire crackled, and in the darkness beyond its light, the wolves continued their nightly activities. Somewhere in the forest, Han-Nul ran with his pack, teaching the younger wolves how to hunt and survive. The species that was supposed to be extinct was thriving, and now the galaxy knew it. I have a question, Administrator Corvin said after a moment of silence. What made you brave enough to bring Hanul to the academy? You could have been expelled, imprisoned, or worse. What made you take that risk? Minho thought about his answer carefully. I grew up with wolves. I learned from them. They taught me that family is worth fighting for, that loyalty means standing together even when things are dangerous. Part 4. The Symposium. The Grand Auditorium was the largest space on the Academy station. It could hold 3,000 beings comfortably, and today every seat was filled. Students from hundreds of worlds had come to see the controversial human and his supposedly extinct wolf. Minho stood backstage, his hands shaking despite his best efforts to stay calm. Through a gap in the curtain he could see the massive crowd. Aliens of every description filled the seats, talking in dozens of languages. In the front rows sat the Academy faculty and several coalition officials who happened to be visiting for routine inspections. Their timing was either very lucky or very unlucky depending on how the next hour went. You can still back out, Taiyang said quietly. He stood beside Minho, holding the recording equipment. No one would blame you. I would blame me, Minho replied. Ara approached from the other direction, her many limbs moving in the agitated pattern Minho had learned meant she was nervous. The audience is larger than expected. Professor Velkus has been speaking to people all morning, preparing them to reject your presentation. Of course he has, Minho said without surprise. In the laboratory cage visible from backstage, Hanul paced calmly. The wolf seemed unbothered by the crowds and noise. Guards stood at every entrance, their weapons ready in case the dangerous predator caused problems. Dean Saris appeared, her ancient face kind but serious. It is time, student Minho. Remember, the Coalition values evidence and reason. Present your facts clearly and let them speak for themselves. Minho nodded and took a deep breath. Ji-Wan and Hyun gave him encouraging gestures from where they sat in the audience. Ara squeezed his hand with one of her limbs, a gesture of friendship that crossed species. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. A Valtorian announcer's voice echoed through the space. Next presentation, Student Minho of Earth. Topic: Re-evaluating Extinct Species Classifications and Conservation Methodology. Minho walked onto the stage and the audience erupted in whispers. He could feel thousands of eyes watching him, judging him, waiting to see if this young human would embarrass himself. He activated the holographic display behind him. The first image showed Earth from space, beautiful and blue. 30 years ago, humanity joined the Galactic Coalition, Minho began. His voice was quiet at first, but grew stronger. We were a young species, still recovering from environmental disasters. The Coalition helped us, taught us, and gave us access to advanced technology. We are grateful. Some of the hostile whispering faded. Professor Velkus sat in the front row, arms crossed, face skeptical. But the Coalition's records about Earth were incomplete, Minho continued. They were based on old military surveys, taken during humanity's darkest time. These records listed many species as extinct. Today I will show you that one of those species still lives. He gestured to the cage, and guards wheeled it to the center of the stage. The audience gasped as Hanul became visible to everyone. The wolf sat calmly, his silver-gray fur shining under the lights. This is Hanul. He is a gray wolf, supposedly extinct for 150 years. The auditorium exploded with noise. Aliens shouted questions in multiple languages. Some students stood up to see better. The guards' hands moved to their weapons. Dean Saris raised her hand for silence. Gradually, the crowd quieted. Professor Velkus stood. This proves nothing. One specimen could be a clone, a genetic recreation. It does not mean the species survived naturally. You're right, Minho agreed, which seemed to surprise the professor. So let me show you more. The holographic display changed. Now it showed vast wilderness areas on Earth, mountains, forests, and valleys. Wolves moved through these landscapes in packs, hunting, playing, raising young. These are recordings from 6 different wolf preserves on Earth. Over 3,000 wolves live in these protected areas. They have been living there, thriving there for over a century. He showed more footage. Wolves taking down prey, adult. Wolves teaching cubs to hunt. Packs defending their territory and wolves interacting peacefully with human researchers who walked among them. Wolves were never extinct, Minho said firmly. When humanity was struggling, when we were destroying our planet, a small group of conservationists made a choice. They hid the species they had saved, keeping them in secret preserves. When the coalition arrived, these conservationists continued hiding them. Why would they hide a successful conservation project? A student called out from the audience. Minho had expected this question. Because they were afraid. Afraid that advanced aliens would see wolves as dangerous and eliminate them. Afraid that the coalition would take the wolves away to be frozen in stasis or displayed in museums. So they kept quiet and let the galaxy believe wolves were gone. Administrator Corvin, a high-ranking coalition official, stood from his seat. He was a Centaurian like Professor Velkis, but older, with more authority. Are you accusing the coalition of threatening species preservation? No, Minho said carefully. I'm suggesting that the coalition's methods are not the only valid methods, and sometimes species need more than preservation. They need to live. He changed the holographic display again. This time it showed two side-by-side comparisons. On the left was a coalition stasis chamber, where a preserved creature floated in suspended animation. On the right was a wolf pack in a forest, alive and active. The coalition preserves species by freezing them, Minho explained. You save their genetic material, their physical forms, their images and data, but they don't evolve. They don't adapt. They don't interact with their environment. Is that really saving them, or is it just cataloging them before they disappear? Ara stood from her seat in the audience. She had been watching the reactions of other scientists, and now she saw her moment to help. I have researched coalition preservation records, Ara announced. Of the 17,000 species preserved in the last 1,000 years, only 3 have ever been reintroduced to natural environments. The rest remain in stasis indefinitely. The coalition claims this is preservation, but it is really just storage. Professor Velkis pointed at Hanul. Because most species are too dangerous or too specialized. That wolf is a predator. It killed to survive. Humanity's willingness to live alongside such creatures shows their primitive nature. Minho felt anger flash through him, but he controlled it. Hanul, come here. The guard stepped back nervously as Minho opened the cage door. Hanul walked out calmly and sat beside Minho on the stage. The audience collectively held their breath. Wolves are predators, Minho agreed. They hunt and kill for food, but they are also intelligent, social, and capable of coexisting with other species, including humans. Watch. He gave Hanul a series of commands. The wolf performed flawlessly, demonstrating the discipline and intelligence that came from thousands of years of evolution alongside humanity. Then Minho did something that made the audience gasp. He sat on the floor of the stage and called Hanul over. The wolf approached and lay down beside him, resting his head on Minho's lap. Minho ran his hand through Hanul's fur. Wolves taught humanity about loyalty, family, and balance, Minho said softly. We domesticated dogs from wolves. We learned about pack structures and cooperation. For thousands of years, wolves were part of our world. When we nearly destroyed that world, we almost lost them. But we didn't, because some humans understood that species are not just things to be cataloged and stored. They are living beings that deserve to live, to adapt, to continue existing in their natural state. He stood, and Hanul stood with him. I am not saying the coalition's methods are wrong. Stasis chambers have saved countless species from total extinction, but I am saying that preservation should not be the end goal. The goal should be life, in real environments, with real challenges and real growth. Administrator Corvin was watching intently, his face thoughtful. Other coalition officials whispered to each other. Minho continued. Earth made terrible mistakes. We destroyed habitats, caused climate disasters, and drove countless species to the edge of extinction. But we also learned. We learned that life finds a way if you give it space. We learned that coexistence is possible if you respect other species. We learned that the wildness of nature is not something to be controlled, but something to be protected. He gestured to the recording still playing behind him. These wolves have been living in their preserves for generations. They have adapted to changing conditions. They have formed new pack structures. They continue to evolve. And they do all of this because we let them. We gave them space, protected them from threats, but we did not freeze them in time. Professor Velkus looked ready to argue again, but Dean Saris spoke first. Student Minho, you have made a compelling case. But how do we know this approach works for other species? Wolves might be unique. They're not, Jiwan called out, standing from her seat. We have similar hidden preserves for tigers, eagles, bears, and 15 other species the Coalition believes are extinct, all living, all thriving. The auditorium erupted again. This revelation was even more shocking than the wolves. Administrator Corvin stood and raised his hand for silence. When the crowd quieted, he looked directly at Minho. If what you say is true, Earth has been deceiving the Coalition for 3 decades. Yes, Minho admitted. There was no point in lying now. And you believe this deception was necessary?